Thursday, May 5th, 2005, and this is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Joseph Conlon at his home at 415 Walnut Street in Roaring Spring, Pennsylvania. Mr. Conlon is 80 years old, having been born on March 6, 1925. Our names are Sarah Wolford and Megan Burnett. Mr. Conlon is our guidance counselor's father. Could you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
I served in World War II in the United States Army Air Force, the 15th Air Force in Italy.
What was your rank?
My rank was at first, second lieutenant. I was then promoted to first lieutenant.
Okay, and to the first one.
Did you volunteer or were you drafted?
I volunteered.
How old were you when you joined the military?
I was 18 when I joined. I was 17 when I volunteered. You could volunteer when you were 17 if you had your parents' permission. My parents were very happy to give them my permission, or their permission.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes, but I wasn't there. I left in my senior year in April. I turned 18 in March of my senior year, and I was called up in April.
Why did you choose the Aviation Cadet program?
I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to become a fighter pilot in the Air Force.
Okay. How long were you at boot camp?
The pre-flight training, which is what be the equivalent of what you're calling boot camp, that lasted 3 months.
Do you have any remembrances?
Of boot camp or of pre-flight? Yes, all good remembrances. Good food, good training, and good companions.
Did you get any character building duties like mess hall or guard duty?
Oh yeah, yeah, and you had to do something wrong to get that, and I had a couple of those. You don't need to know what I did that was wrong.
Do you remember anything about the duties?
Well, the one, yeah, I do. I wanted to sit in the mess hall with a friend of mine, but the officer in charge of the mess hall said I couldn't do that. But I did, and then my punishment was I had to walk around in a circle for 2 hours with my backpack parachute on, which I thought was kind of silly, but I did it.
What do you remember about your officers?
The officers I was associated with during my training were very good. They were very good teachers. Everything was hands-on training, especially when you got to advanced training, when you actually flew. You see, I became a bombardier. I didn't become a pilot. So my training involved using the bomb site, the Norden bomb site, and dropping 100-pound black powder bombs on targets. And then those would be filmed to determine how accurate I was. And the pilots, the officers I was associated with would have been bombardier training officers and pilots who flew the planes that we were bombing from. And they were excellent.
Is there a special officer that you remember?
I remember, because I became an officer, then I associated with officers. So I remember a whole bunch of them. And I'm still friends with many of them, although the circle of friendship is shrinking. My best friend and I are both the last 2 surviving members of our respective crews. And we're both bombardiers, which would indicate the bombardiers are either lucky or just have the right genes.
What regulations were very frustrating in the service?
Actually none. I grew up in a family which was a disciplined family. I went to Catholic schools where the discipline was pretty strict. I went to the military. It wasn't anything new to be disciplined. Mm-hmm. And so I had very little trouble. I don't remember any real frustrations. Later on, when we were flying combat and on the mission that I was shot down on, and you might come to this later, but if you don't, the officer who led our group that day to a target in eastern Germany, the mission was recalled. That meant that we were to turn back and come home because of the weather over the target. And the officer leading, who was lieutenant colonel at the time, he was leading our whole group, he didn't turn around. And as a consequence, we had to break up into small groups. And the group I was in consisted of 4 airplanes, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, we called that a box. And our whole box was shot down. And of the 10 guys on the crew, one crew was carrying an extra man, so that's 41 guys. And 17 of those 41 were killed, 5 on my plane. Now I have trouble with that man that led that mission, because in reality he disobeyed an order and we lost 17 men from our bomb group. Now I have resolved that a long time in the past, and I see the man occasionally. I don't particularly associate with him at our reunions, but I do see him, and I don't have any rancor for him, but I had a difficult time adjusting to that, because 5 of the guys who were killed were friends of mine.
Who was the most unforgettable character that you met in the service?
The most unforgettable character I met was probably a guy named John Kellogg. Kellogg was from Minot, North Dakota, and he was a bombardier on another crew. He probably was able to swear more in one sentence than anybody else I've ever been around. He had a terrible, but he was very humorous. He didn't have any rancor. He wasn't hurting anybody, but it was just his way. Plus, he was an absolute flake. To give you an example, his plane crash landed coming back to our base. And John Kellogg was Catholic, but he also, and he wore a St. Christopher medal, but he also wore Star David as a Jewish symbol. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to take any chances. And when he crawled out of that plane that crashed, he knelt down and said a prayer. And a little Italian shepherd, our base was in Italy near where they kept sheep, come over and started to talk to him in Italian, and John said in no, I'm not going to say what he said, but he told the little Italian to keep quiet until he finished praying. And he phrased keep quiet with a couple of expletives. So, but John Kellogg, John's dead now. He was an orphan, raised in an orphanage, became a bombardier. But yeah, he was the oddest character I ever read.
Could you describe your flight training?
My flight training, sure. Flight training occurred, there were 2 phases to our training. Pre-flight, which we didn't fly. That was all military training, history, mathematics, things of that kind, marching. Pre-flight, because I became a bombardier, I went to Big Spring, and there they had twin-engine planes called AT-11s, and the training consisted of 2 aviation cadets, bombardiers, going up together, being flown out to targets that were painted on the ground in the deserts in Texas and New Mexico, and dropping bombs. While I would be dropping bombs, the other cadet would be taking films from the back of the plane of my hits. Then we would trade around. He would drop bombs and I would film his hits. Then we would go home, they would go back to base, examine those films and see what we were doing. So my pre-flight training consisted of flying every day and practice dropping bombs using the Norden bomb site.
How much experience did you have using a parachute?
Well, we didn't get any training. Mm-hmm. Now, there are 2 types of parachutes. There's a chest pack, which is a parachute about like this, and it hooks onto the straps that you wear. You put the harness on. You wear the harness at all times. The reason for the chest pack, because in a plane, you can't get through the plane if you're wearing a backpack. Now, sometimes a pilot and co-pilot would wear backpacks because they could sit on the parachute. But the rest of us who had to move through the plane, we had to wear a chest pack. We got absolutely no training except to make sure we had the harness on and keep it tight. Now, accidentally, I had an experience with it. Now, you have to understand, this occurred after I was commissioned, because the next phase of training after pre-flight consisted of bringing 10 men together, 6 enlisted men who were gunners, and 4 officers, a pilot, a co-pilot, a bombardier, and a navigator. And then we trained together as a crew before we went overseas. And we would fly, and that trained a pilot and a co-pilot and a navigator. We would drop bombs, and that trained me, again on practice targets. And the gunners would occasionally, we'd have a gunnery mission. Usually a plane would come by trailing a big, long canvas chute light, and they practice shooting. So that was our training as a crew, because we're going to fly as a crew when we get overseas. During one of those missions, they have to understand, I was in a B-24 Liberator. My position was right in the nose. Now to get in the nose, you have to crawl down through a little tunnel in front of the bomb bays. And once we flew in old model B-24s, they didn't have a turret on. Later, when we went overseas and got our new plane, we had a turret up front. But in the old planes we trained in, it was just a closed-in glass enclosure, plexiglass. And the B-24 has a triangular landing gear. The front wheel retracts up into the nose. And where it comes up, there's a door and a hatch. That became the escape hatch for those people in the nose. We flew a mission my crew training was at El Paso, Texas. Biggs Field. And we flew up to Alamogordo, New Mexico, turned left and went out into the desert, and out there on big giant lava flows were big white bullseyes, and then we dropped our bombs. Well, one training mission, we went up around Alamogordo. Now in the nose, in a B-24, you can't see anybody else in the plane. The only communication you'd have is by intercom. Because this was an old model, there was only one set of earphones up there, and I had them on. And all of a sudden, what we call the panic button. There's a button on the pilot's wheel. If the plane's in trouble, he rings the button, which shoots on, rings it a second time, jump. The panic bell rang. And at the same time, the pilot said over the intercom, in what I thought was a very agitated tone of voice, "You know what that means." And I thought, yeah, that means get out of here. So I took the earphones off. The navigator had opened the hatch, had hooked the chute on, looked up at me and said, "What do I do?" Said, "Jump." Out he went. I put my chute on, looked down. Now it's 8,000 feet. You know how you're a kid and you're going to jump off a wall or off a tree, you hang down. Now you're 5 feet closer to the ground. So I thought I'd hang down. So I hung down and I looked down and I had my chute on backwards. I had the ripcord over here, should be over here. And I don't know whether that would have affected anything or not, but I pulled myself back up in, turned it around, shut my eyes and fell out. First thing I did after I opened the chute was look for the plane because I thought it was in trouble. Just kept going further and further away. We jumped and didn't have to because I misinterpreted the tone of the pilot's voice. When I looked around after my chute opened, I couldn't see the navigator's chute, and I thought, oh, his chute didn't open. I come down the middle of nowhere, wandered around for a while, and some guys coming to pick up. Took me into Alamogordo, and there's the navigator. He come right downtown Alamogordo, and he's in the mayor's office. He's being treated like some big shot. He's already called back to the base of Texas. They sent a car up, and when we got back to the base, needless to say, we got holy hell. I mean, we got reamed out good. They had a pilot there, and after it was all over, the pilot's name was Bob Evans, a wonderful man. He was one of the 5 killed, and he was a good man. He was. He said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Well, you said, do you know what that means?" And he said, "Yeah, that's all I wanted to know. Do you know what that means?" He sent somebody down into the nose when they didn't get any answer after the plane kept going. And the guy come back and said, "There's nobody down there." So yeah, now that was my dream. Now when I jumped in combat, when the plane was burning and going down and I had to get out, that was a different story. There was no doubt about having to get out of that baby, yeah.
What type of aircraft did you serve on?
I served on a B-24 Liberator. Can you picture what that looked like?
No.
There's one.
Oh, okay.
4-engine heavy bomber. There were 2 heavy bombers during World War II in Europe. There was B-17, which was the Flying Fortress, and the B-24, which was a Liberator. There was always a question about which was the better one. 24 flew higher, faster, and carried a heavier bomb load. 17 was prettier, and the 17 gets most of the publicity. Now there was another heavy bomber, but it wasn't used in Europe, the B-29. It was used in the Far East. It was the one that dropped the atomic bomb. Yeah.
How many men were part of the crew on the plane?
10 men,
Okay.
6 gunners, a tail gunner in a turret with twin 50 calibers, 2 waist gunners, 1 at each window in the waist, a ball gunner, and an upper turret gunner and a nose gunner.
Okay.
And then the four officers, the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier.
Okay. What place were you shipped to in Europe to start your assignment?
Say that again?
What place were you shipped to in Europe to start
I was
your
shipped
assignment?
I was shipped to Italy. Let me back up once. In Europe during World War II, there were 2 strategic air forces. A strategic air force is an air force that bombs strategic targets. They don't necessarily bomb in front of troops to help troops on the ground. They bomb oil refineries, railroad yards, manufacturing facilities that are making war material, things of that kind. The one was the 8th Air Force in England, and the other was the 15th in Italy. Now, the 8th bombed targets in northern Germany and France. We bombed targets in eastern Germany, Eastern Europe, the Balkans, who were allies of the Germans, Hungary and Romania and those places. We also bombed in Austria, northern Italy, and southern France. So, because some of the targets that the 8th couldn't reach, we could from our base in Italy. So I was assigned to the 460th Bomb Group, which was located in Spinazzola, Italy, small town where the Army engineers built an airfield. Very primitive. We lived in tents. We didn't have houses. When I first got there, we didn't have a mess hall inside. We ate outside or took our food back into our tent. 4 officers shared a tent, 6 enlisted men shared a tent. They had the officer section over here and enlisted man section over there. The tent right next to us, the officers in that tent, eventually we got to know each other pretty well. And they were flying on our wing when we were shot down, and they were shot down. They lost 2 men. And the one man I told you about earlier, a man named Mike Brown, who lives in California, he was a bombardier. He's the last one of his crew, and I'm the last one of my crew.
Okay. Where was your plane sent on bombing missions?
Where was I on bombing missions? Mm-hmm. Right up in the very front of the plane. The bomb site was, where's that picture of the B-24? Now, it doesn't show you very well, but there's a nose turret right here. And underneath that nose turret, there's a breakdown of it. Maybe you can see that.
Okay.
Okay. Right here is where the bombardier was. Mm-hmm. And you had your bomb site. You sort of hunkered down. Some of them had a little stool, like a milking stool, mm-hmm. on a pivot that you could sit on, but you had to bend over like this, and right above you was the bottom of the nose turret in which a gunner was sitting, mm-hmm. and right behind you, working on a table that folded down, stood the navigator. So there were 3 of us down, very crowded conditions. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have to go down there until we got close to the target, and I had to go down and preset some data into the bomb site. It's like a small computer. And then get into the aperture, look, find a target. And once you start your bombing run, the bombardier through the bomb site actually flies the plane. Now, he can't change altitude, but he can change drift. So you wanted to make sure that the crosshairs in your bomb site, this crosshair, ran right over the target. Mm-hmm. And then everything else was pretty much predetermined. Your height, the weight of the bombs, how fast you wanted them to fall out of the plane, so that determined how far apart they fall on the ground.
Okay. What were some of the bombing sites that your plane hit?
That we bombed? Mm-hmm. Well, we bombed targets in northern Italy. We bombed Bologna, a city in northern Italy. We bombed a seaport called La Spezia, which is on the Tyrrhenian side, the west side. Mm-hmm. We bombed we bombed Sète in France, which was a big oil refinery in southern France. Germany had occupied France at that time. In southern France, Vichy, France, was an ally of the Germans. We bombed Budapest in Hungary, a couple other places in Hungary. Our worst two missions were to the oil fields of Ploesti, which is in Romania. That's where Germany got about 60% of its oil for its war machines. So, and that was a well-protected target. We went there twice. As a matter of fact, coming back from there on one of the missions is when I got shot. We bombed Vienna and a place right outside of Vienna called Vienna Neustadt, which is New Vienna, which was a big manufacturing of German fighter aircraft. And we bombed a place called Bleckhammer, which is way up in northern Germany, which was a big oil refinery. And it was to that target that we were going on the day we got shot down. We didn't even get close to it. In Italy, you flew out over the Adriatic from our base, turned left and went north. Because if you went north over Italy, the Germans still had northern Italy. So the best way to go was out over the ocean, out over the Adriatic Sea. Then you hit Austria, Hungary, and like that. And we were over Hungary when we got shot down.
Okay. How many bombing missions did you take part in?
Okay, let me think once now. I flew, see, some of the targets counted a double mission.
Mm-hmm.
I flew, I think, 15 actual missions, but I flew 2 which were worth 4. So just 15. Now, I missed because when I was wounded, I was in a hospital for 5 weeks, in a field hospital, like a MASH unit type thing. And while I was there, the crew kept flying. We flew every day. Every day the weather was good, you flew. So they had something like 30-some. And what happened, it started out when you flew 25, you could come home. Then they upped it to 35. And I think toward the end, you had to fly 50. And the reason for that was they wanted to keep the experienced crew. If you flew 25, you must be doing something right. Mm-hmm. And in reality, you were just lucky, really. Yeah.
Could you describe what happened when your plane was shot down?
Sure. We were going to bomb Bleckhammer in northeastern Germany, about 100 miles to the east of Berlin, as a long mission. See, when the 460th Bomb Group was only one of many bomb groups in the 15th Air Force. So when you were going on a mission, the 460th would take off. And you spent about an hour just circling around till all the other bomb groups came up, joined up, and then headed to a target. Now, toward the end, you're talking about 1,000 planes. You're talking about maybe 600 bombers, maybe 300 some fighter escort. Okay, so we took off for Bleckhammer, formed up in our groups, and here we go. So we get over just about hitting the coast near Trieste, which would be in Yugoslavia, right at the top where the angle's like, and you come down into Italy and down into the Yugoslavia. Just got about there when the word came out that the mission was aborted. We were to come back. It was recalled because weather over the target. And like I said, our guy kept going. Well, you couldn't break formation. But the weather got so bad that it was dangerous to fly in tight formations. So we broke up. And then 4 planes joined up after we got in and came down a little lower. And the 4 planes, there were 3 from our squadron. Each group is broken into 4 squadrons. There were 4 in our squadron and 1 from another squadron, constituted this little box that I was telling you about. And near Lake Balaton in Hungary, Lake Balaton's a great big lake. It's a resort over there now. And we always used it as a navigation aid. You knew where you were when you could see Lake Balaton. You had an idea. Well, right over Lake Balaton, or actually on the ground in that area, the Germans had fighter bases. And fighters came up. And we were attacked. The official battle report said we were attacked by 35 Messerschmitt 1 and 2 10s. Now that was a twin-engine German fighter, was used as a fighter and a bomber. The most common German fighter that we encountered was the Messerschmitt 109, single engine. But these were twin engine, 35 against 4, and they shot us all down. And in my plane, I hadn't gone down into the nose. I was still sitting on the flight deck. There's a little jump seat on the side back of the pilot. Pilot on the left seat, co-pilot on the right seat, upper gunner with his feet hanging down above. Our wing was on fire, and Evans, the pilot, turned around and rapped me in the chest and said, "Get out of here." So I dropped down into the bomb bay. Now we still have our bombs on. And I wanted to open the bomb bay doors, but they wouldn't open. And in the meantime, the navigator had crawled up from the nose, and he was trying to get them open. And he turned and went back into the nose, and he and the nose gunner jumped out of that same place he jumped earlier. I went back through the bomb base to the rear deck. Now back there are 4 guys. There's a ball gunner, 2 waist gunners, and a tail gunner. Now it's about that high to get from the bomb bay up into that deck, so I jumped up in there, and it was terrible. The 2 waist gunners were very badly shot up, dead, I'm sure. The rear gunner was sprawled back out of the turret. His feet were still in it, but he was sprawled out. The only guy alive was the guy in the ball. He'd come up out of the ball turret. The ball turret hangs down. In a B-24, it's retractable, comes up and down. But he crawled out of it. I checked the body of this guy, the ball gunner checked this guy, then we jumped. And there's a camera hatch in the back of a B-24 that serves as an escape hatch. Now in the meantime, the co-pilot had followed me back through the bomb bay, and he went around me when I stopped to check on this guy. See, if you thought there was any life in him, you could hook a chute on him and push him out, because the Germans or whoever, they would probably take care of it. But it was senseless in this case. But anyhow, co-pilot jumped, and I jumped, and for years I thought that the ball gunner jumped right after me. But it was only afterwards, after I come home. And the ball gunner wouldn't talk about it. He was from Pittsburgh. He wouldn't talk a thing. But finally one time we got together and he did. And what happened to him, he didn't come out right after I did. He got pinned against the side of the fuselage because the plane went into a dive, and centrifugal force of some kind kept him from jumping. So he didn't jump right away. Well, I jumped, opened my chute, and the sky's full of junk. There's pieces of bombers. One plane blew up, and for years I thought it was our plane, but it turned out that it wasn't after I found out. Because you find out a lot of things afterwards, you know, when you get to talking. I come down in a little woods on top of a hill, and some Hungarian farmers came along, and they got me right away. One guy had a hoe, looked like a tree trunk for a handle, and then the guy had a shotgun. So that was it. Now the ball gunner, he didn't get out right away. The plane was going down, but it circled around, and he was able to jump. And in the crash, of course the bombs were on it. It would have blown up. And I don't know to this day what happened to the pilot or the upper gunner, because when I left the flight deck, they were both alive. The flight deck hadn't been hit. It was the rear that took the hits. So I don't know what happened. I like to think that the pilot may have stayed with that plane long enough to let the guys get out. And I don't know about the upper gunner. I don't know whether he knew what was going on. I don't know what happened. Now we've been back. Doug and another son, Jerome, and a grandson, and I went back to Hungary. And there's a monument near where our plane went down with the names of our 5 guys on. And we were able to get there, able to get to the site of the crash. I have a friend in Hungary, young man, 30 years old, and his wife and little baby. And I'm going back in May to see them, 25th. But he has given us pieces of the plane. The field that we went down in, when they plow it up, they still turn up pieces of metal from our plane. So 4 bombers went down. That's 10-man crew, but the one plane was carrying a photographer. So that's 41 guys. And I told you, 17 were killed. 2 were very badly burned. They never got into a POW camp. They were in hospitals in Hungary and Germany for about a year. Then they were repatriated back to the States through Switzerland. The rest of us ended up POW camps. So was that the question? Mm-hmm. Okay.
What was the first thing that you did when you reached the ground after you left the plane?
Well, we were told Officers carried a sidearm, a .45 caliber pistol, automatic. And we were told not to carry it because there's a tendency that if you're down and you're about to be captured, you're going to shoot it out like some Wild West thing, and you're going to lose. So I didn't have that on. The other thing we were told was to hide your parachute. So I come down in some little bushes, like it was a very soft land. It had a perfect land. I wasn't scratched. Didn't have a scratch. Pulled my shoe down and stuck it under a rock. But by that time, these guys are all around me. So the first thing I thought was, well, I'm okay. Yeah. I probably was in a little state of shock, I would imagine. But I wasn't mistreated at that time. They took me down, and we were in a rural area. And I can remember over here under a little tree was a bench, and there were some Hungarian women there, and one was their young mother, and she was nursing her baby. And they set me on that bench until everything settled down, you know, because there were pieces falling to the ground, planes coming down, parachutes coming down. Then the Hungarian soldiers came, took me to a building not far from there, and took me inside, and there stood my co-pilot. And he was in bad shape. He wasn't hurt, but he was a pale-skinned man anyhow, good guy. But he was very pale, and he was standing very stiff, and there were two Germans sitting behind the desk, two Luftwaffe officers. And I ignored them at first and asked them, how you doing, Steve? Then they put us on a truck. We drove around the countryside picking up guys. And till we got everybody that had survived, then they took us to the air base where the planes took off from that shot us down. While we were there, he gets tired of hearing this story. But while we were there, they took us into a room, and up in the front of the room, little building, there was a couple Hungarians sitting behind a table, and they asked us to come up one by one to the table. I hung back to see what was going on, and they were searching the guys and taking things. The only thing I had was my high school ring. Now, your high school rings are a lot better than the high school rings we used to get. You don't get green deposits on your finger. When, you know, mine made green rings. It didn't have a stone or anything like that, but it was my ring. And that's the only remembrance I had of high school, and I got it early because I wasn't there when graduation. So I thought, well, you're not going to get this ring. So I stuck it in my mouth, and they didn't get it. I have that ring upstairs yet. So I put one over on it. But what makes the story even funnier outside afterwards, the co-pilot, a guy named Steve Mills, he was married. They took his wedding ring. He said, I saw what you did. And if I'd have been quick enough, I'd have given you my ring because your mouth is big enough to hide it. And I still have that ring. And when we went back to Hungary, we went to that air base in 2003 and met it's no longer an air base, it's a induction center where they take the Hungarian recruits in. And the guy in charge, we talked to him, and I had the interpreter, this friend of ours, tell them that story, and they all laughed, and I said, yeah, you can laugh. I still have the ring.
What were the first steps in the POW process?
Well, that's pretty typical. The first thing to do is they stick you in solitary confinement. And the idea there is they want you to break you down so that when they interrogate you, you're more willing to say things. Now, the protocol in those days was name, rank, and serial number. Now, that's been changed. It's not that way anymore, because as a result of Vietnam and Korea, where they actually did torture some guys. To my knowledge, that didn't happen to guys then. The only abuse that happened to me, actually, a Hungarian guard hit me twice in the face. That's all. And that's not bad. I like to think the old man hit me harder than that guy did at home. I know my brothers did. But say the question again.
What were the first steps?
Oh, the first step was solitary confinement. When they got everybody, after we were taken to that air base, then they marched us down to a little train station and took us by train into Budapest. And there's an old prison, it's still there, and we went to that prison when we were over there. And they stuck us in solitary cells down in the basement like. And I was in that cell for 15 days. Now, they took us out once a day and let us march around a courtyard. You know, there were a whole bunch of us in there. And after 15 days, and they interrogated us, and the German came in, or they took us out of the cell and took us where the German was. And they asked, you know, your name, rank, and serial number, and then they start playing games with you. Like, well, you want your parents to know, so why don't you fill this form out, and we'll see your parents find out. And that was a big worry. There was periods of time when I was more concerned. I was missing in action, but I wasn't missing. I knew exactly where I was, but my parents didn't know. And that's a heck of a worry on people. So anyhow, I didn't tell him anything. But he knew more about me and our base and our officers than I did. So, okay, then that was over, back into solitary. And then eventually, after 15 days, they took about 20 of us out down to the railroad station in Budapest and put us in a boxcar and sent us north into what was then East Germany, a place called Sagen, near Breslau. Now it's Poland, and Breslau is now Rocklau, and Sagen is spelled with a Z instead of an S now. And that was the first prisoner of war camp. That was Stalag Luft 3. Now maybe you saw the movie The Great Escape. Okay, that was the camp. Now, Stalag Luft 3 was made up of 5 camps within the camp, compounds, east, north, south, west, and center. I was in South Camp, all officers, all Air Force. North Camp was all British officers, and remember who flew for the RAF. And okay, we were there. Now, we were there I got there probably, I don't know, July sometime, early July. No, it would have been early July, middle of July. And I was there until January 27th of 45. And what happened, the Russians were coming close. And Germany did not want to lose its POWs. So as the periphery of Germany collapsed, Allies coming in, French, Americans, English, coming in from the west, and the Russians coming in from the east, every prisoner of war camp, the Germans force-marched the guys out, concentrated them in camps in the center of Germany. So that was a bad time. We were ordered out of the camp at 9 or 10 o'clock on the night of January 27th, 45. Now, the winter of 44, 45 in Europe was one of the worst winters they had. So we were out just blizzard conditions. We didn't have adequate clothes, for sure. And we didn't have any food. And our compound was the first one out. So we had to wade the snow. And they marched us, I think it was like 3 days and 4 nights. And we had maybe, I don't know, a couple of rest stops, but not for long. And then we got to a place called Spremberg. And they put us back in boxcars. Now they got a whole train of boxcars, because there were. See, each compound at Stalag Luft 3 probably had 1,000 prisoners. So you're talking 5,000. No, it had 2,000. You're talking about 10,000 prisoners marching. Now you can imagine a line. And guys were falling out. I found out afterwards that we didn't lose anybody. But I know guys passed, couldn't go. But they were picked up, I understand, by Germans with a horse-drawn hay wagon coming back to the column. Now that puts us in from Spremberg by boxcar to near Munich, to a place called Moosburg, a little town north of Munich, central Germany, Bavaria, south central Germany. And we were there from, well, whenever we got there, until Sunday, April 29, 1945. And an American spearhead came through and liberated the camp. And that was a great day. It was a Sunday. I'd gone to Mass. There was a British paratrooper chaplain, big Irish guy. And you have to understand, as the war started to wind down, things got real chaotic. We had already, in Stalag 17A, which is where I was now, and you understand Stalag Luft, Luft is German for air. So Stalag is an air jail, air camp. But the other one, Stalag, that's anybody, Wehrmacht, infantry guys. And there were probably 100,000 prisoners there, of all kinds, anybody that was fighting against the Germans. So I'd go into Mass. It was in another part. We had already knocked down the walls inside, the wire inside the camp, so we could move about. Those German guards they were very worried about, because they knew it was over. Our treatment got better as the war got closer to an end. I come back to where we were living, which was just on the ground. We had tents for a while, but we were on the ground most of the time. And 2 P-51s, that was one of our fighters, came over to camp. One guy did a barrel roll, so we knew something was happening. Then we could hear cannon fire. And pretty soon the tanks came. See German soldiers, American soldiers. There was a little firefight. tank pulled up, and there must have been a sniper in the church steeple in the little town which overlooked the camp, and he just leveled that steeple. I stayed pretty close to the ground because at this stage I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm closer to home now than I've been for a long time, so I'm going to try to stay as safe as I can. So.
Were officers treated any different than the enlisted men?
Well, see, any time you talk to an ex-POW, you're going to get a story that's going to vary a little bit from the story of the next ex-POW. Now, supposedly Stalag Luft 3 was a show camp. This was one that the Germans used to show how good we treat you, but it wasn't any fun. Now, whether we were treated better, I don't think so. By the Geneva Convention, the convention is a code of treatment, and Geneva was the town in Switzerland where the Geneva Conventions were created in the 20s, determining how you can treat prisoners. For example, you can't keep a prisoner in solitary more than 30 days, but you can let them out after 30 days for a day and put them back in for 30. You have to feed your prisoners of war the same calories that you're feeding your soldiers. You're supposed to give them parole, walks. Well, at first, that was easy to do because the Germans didn't have many prisoners. But after a while, you know, they just couldn't do that. So whether we were treated better, I don't think so. I think I'm sure there were camps where there was more bad treatment. But for example, in South Camp, in Stalag Luft 3, 2 of our guys were shot. One guy was just shot. I mean, some guard in the tower just shot. And another time there was an air raid, and when there was an air raid in a nearby city, see, Berlin was only about 100 miles from where we were. And if Berlin had been bombed the night before by the British, you could see the fire in the sky. And if the Americans were in the neighborhood during the day, you had to get in your barracks. Well, one man during their raid stood in the doorway of his barracks, and a guard up in the tower shot. So you never knew what. For example, if I were a German guard in that prison and my family lived in a town nearby that had just been bombed, I'd have to be a little upset, you know, and that sort of thing happened. We didn't get, food was the worst. You couldn't get any food. The Germans supplemented the Red Cross food parcel. We were to get 1 parcel per man per week. We never did. The best I ever did was, at first, was 4 of us shared a parcel. Now, in that parcel would be canned meat, canned milk, or powdered milk, a chocolate bar, pack of cigarettes, things of that kind. But the Germans were supposed to supplement that. So they would bring in stuff. They would bring in potatoes. They would bring in cabbage. We called it brown death. It would come in buckets. The brown, stinking stuff. But it was food. So that was the worst, the food, I think. And then you were denied your freedom. You couldn't do what you wanted to do. You took your destiny away from you, you know. And it's hard for you to understand that, or anybody, unless you've been in a situation where you are no longer in control of what you want to do. I couldn't get up when I wanted to get up, or go to bed when I wanted to go to bed, or walk out the door and take a walk someplace. Couldn't do it. And those simple things like that, you don't think about until they're taken away, and then they become a little bit more cherished. Mm-hmm. They counted us twice a day, in the morning at 9 o'clock, and what we did, we maintained discipline. We organized by barracks, and the senior American officer in our camp was our commanding officer. We paid no attention to the Germans. I don't mean we didn't pay attention to them if they said do this or do that, but we ran the camp as far as we could. I wasn't allowed to talk to any of the Germans, and there would be what we called ferrets, you know, the little ferret animal. Well, in the morning there'd be about 6 Germans come in bunny suits, big coverall type, big long screwdrivers, and they all spoke English, and all they did all day long was just circulate around the camp individually. You and I are talking, they'd one come up and listen. Then at the end of the day they'd have a critique, maybe they could pick up some information, and the barracks were all built up off the ground like this to prevent tunneling. So they would crawl under there and probe with their big screwdrivers for tunnels. But I couldn't speak to them. we had an escape committee. You were obligated to escape if a situation presented itself that you could go right now. But if you had to make a plan, then you had to turn that into what we called the Big X. Now, he was in charge of escape activity. And the reason he did that was because maybe there's a big escape plan being formulated, and they don't want your escape plan following up theirs. You see what I'm saying? Now, if I have an opportunity that presents itself just out of the blue, then I'm supposed to go. But I was never involved in any of that, and I just never was presented with the opportunity. I had entertained thoughts when we were being moved from the air base in Hungary into Budapest of jumping off the train, but that would have been stupid. You know, Hungary, where am I going to go?
What were the barracks like?
The barracks?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Stalag Luft 3, there were cardboard barracks. Here. I just got this book from a friend out in California. His dad was a prisoner. Now here, the barracks were cardboard buildings, corridors straight down the middle, rooms off of each side. Now the rooms were divided. There was somewhere like at the end was a room for the barracks chief. Maybe there would have been 2 in there, but there would probably be 6. We had a room that was designed for 8. We had 14 in it. We had bunks 3 high. It was very primitive, but that's what the barracks would look like. Now, you see it says fire pool on there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you asked a question earlier about could we get better treatment. I have a friend who lives right down there.
Mm-hmm.
He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge as an enlisted man. He's convinced that we had a swimming pool in Stalag Luft 3. And that's the swimming pool. Now that was a fire pool. It was about that deep, and it wasn't much bigger than this room, and it was designed in case one of the buildings caught on fire. You had a bucket brigade to scoop the water out and through that was our swim. But this guy believed that we had a swimming pool. Yeah.
Can you describe what the clothing was like?
Well, the clothing was what you wore when you were taken prisoner, and then when you got to Stalag Luft 3, because Germany had captured just tons of material from the British, from the French, from the Americans, and they kept it all. So, for example, when I got there, they gave me a French overcoat. It was a great overcoat, real long, and it was good for the winter. And on the side, you could flip back and button up the sides for marching. That was a great overcoat. They gave me British battle trousers, which were wool, which was great, and had a couple of khaki shirts, American. So I had a conglomerate of different types of material equipment. Gave me, I think I had American shoes, I think, combat boots, I think. But not much, we didn't have. Now you could get parcels from home. You could, but my parents, when I come home, they told me they sent like 10 parcels. I think I maybe got 3, and it was a long time. And mail going out of the camp, the Germans gave us 4. You ever see a V-mail? Mm-hmm. Okay, the real flimsy paper folds into its own envelope. Okay, we got 4 of those a month, and 3 postcard size things. But everything was highly censored. And what are you going to tell them? Because if you say anything about the camp, it's going to be blacked out. So I just said everything's fine, I'm healthy, I'm in good shape, that's all. I still have Mom saved them all. I still have them upstairs, but they're not worth anything. I mean, for as far as history is concerned, because I was never sick. I was fine all the time. Mm-hmm. Even when I was sick, I was fine.
Did a lot of the prisoners lose weight?
Oh yeah, yeah. Everybody lost weight. I dropped. I don't know. I think I dropped about 30 pounds. I left high school. I was playing football, 185 pounds. I was probably the biggest kid at Altoona Catholic High on the team that year. And I come home, I was down around 150. But it didn't take long to put it back on.
What kind of help did you receive from the Red Cross?
the Red Cross provided us with parcels. And like I say, we were supposed to get one a week. Now there were British parcels, American parcels, and Canadian parcels. And that's what it was a cardboard box, about that, like a cube. And in it, those were the contents. Now I like to get the Canadian parcel because it had canned bacon and canned butter, whereas the American parcels had margarine. But basically that's what you got. Now the Germans were supplied us with, the biggest thing we got from the Germans was their army bread. Now their army bread was made out of, and this is true, the chief ingredient was tree flour. Now you know what tree flour was? F-L-O-U-R, flour. It was sawdust. So the German bread contained tree flour, sawdust. I have the recipe in another article somewhere. I'm going to give each one of you this stuff you can look at. But I loved it. Everybody else hated it. In one barracks they had a hand-turned slicer that the Germans allowed you to have because you couldn't cut it. You weren't allowed to have knives that were sharp enough to cut a loaf of bread made out of a tree. So every morning and evening I'd go to this room in another barracks where they'd cut the bread because most of the guys would come in and cut both ends off. Then they'd just throw them in the cardboard box. I scrounged them up, took them back in. I loved it. I really did. So I was okay on a tree floor diet.
Did anyone try to escape your prison camp?
Oh yeah. We had people escape. We never had any American get the whole way back though. Now, did you ever see The Great Escape? No, okay now, that was the north compound. The north compound's wire was here, and it was about a 10-yard area with concertina wire in, and then here was our wire. So we could stand at our wire and look over into the British compound. Oh, we watched them play soccer and rugby and things like that, and we talked back and forth. Okay, now from that compound in March 27th, they had dug 3 tunnels, Tom, Dick, and Harry. And on March 27th, I think it was, 44, 76 or 78, I forget which, British officers got out. Germans captured all but 3. 3 of the British officers made it back to Britain, back to England. None of them was an Englishman. One was a Norwegian flying with the RAF. 2 were Norwegians. And one was a Holland Dutchman, a guy named Bram Vanderstock, who later came to America and became a doctor and lived in New Jersey. Those 3 got back. Now you can figure out why, can't you? Because they're Europeans. They spoke different languages, they had a good command of the English, and they probably looked like Europeans, you know. Now the other 70 whatever were all caught, and Hitler ordered them killed. And the Gestapo murdered 50 of them, just shot them. Back of the head, took them out in the woods and shot them. Sent their ashes back to the camp in little lead containers and allowed the British officers in North Camp to bury them in an altar that they allowed them to build outside the camp in little pine woods. That altar's still there. Now I understand after the war, the families got the ashes back to England. But that was the big escape. That was the great escape. Now there were escape attempts, all kind of many, yeah. But like I say, to my knowledge, there was no American. I know from South Camp nobody got out. I don't know about the other camps for sure.
What type of work or activities did you take part in at your prison camp?
We couldn't work because by the Geneva Convention you cannot work officers. I wish we could have worked because the people that, and I found this out later when we got to Stalag 17, Stalag 7, not 17, Stalag 7A, that talking to enlisted men there, they would be taken into a city after a bombing and made clean up the place. Well, while they're there, they're making contact with civilians, and every Red Cross parcel had at least 1 pack of cigarettes, and cigarettes was our monetary exchange. That's what our economy was based on. They could buy a loaf of bread from a guy in Berlin, say, good German bread for a cigarette. They'd come back to the camp and sell it for a pack of cigarettes. They're making money. They're millionaires in terms of cigarettes. So, but we weren't allowed to work. I wish we would have. I would have relished the chance to get outside and work. I don't know how hard I'd work, but I'd at least got out and had something to do. Now, not being able to do that, what we did, there was a pathway around the inside of the camp, and that was called a circuit, and we'd walk the circuit, or run, work out. We had softball. The Salvation Army, no, the YMCA sent in softball stuff, so we had softball. We had touch football. We had some books. We had a small library. A lot of the guys did arts and crafts. They made whatever they could. The big hobby was the canned milk came in canned, and the powdered milk came in canned, about like that. And it was called Klim, which is milk spelled backwards. And the Klim can, cut and made into a sheet, became they book covers with it, they made models with it. Later on at Stalag 7A, they made a stove out of a Klim can. With a spinner here, you could heat up a coffee, with fire, paper, and twigs. So there's a lot of hobbies. A lot of guys, we had a couple college professors who taught classes. I took class in poetry. So those were about the, now we were counted twice a day, and after that, that's it. We had the day to ourselves, whatever we wanted to do, which wasn't very much.
How long were you a POW?
Okay, I was a POW from June 30th of 44 until April 29th of 45. That's about 10 months in it, yeah. Now let me tell you something. The average length of time that an American was incarcerated in German prisoner of war camp during World War II was 10 months. Now that means that there were some there for a couple of years. There was a guy in town, he's dead now. He was 2 years in the camp. And there were some there, the guys that got caught during the Battle of the Bulge in December of 45, they got out about all the camps were liberated about the same time. So they were in a couple of months, See how average I am? 10 months. Nothing special.
Did the Germans allow you to celebrate Christmas or any other holidays?
Oh yeah. And I'm going to give you some. I wrote a piece about Christmas, the Christmas of 44. You have that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you? Well,
Mr. Nisto made us a copy. Molly read it.
Oh, did she read it? Okay. Yeah. I wrote that in '86 here, thinking back to that Christmas. That Christmas was very beautiful. It was very cold, very clear, and they allowed us out at night. See, they turned the lights out in the camp at 9 o'clock, except for the searchlights in the towers. Mm-hmm. And that night, everything. And they allowed us out all night. We didn't have to go in the barracks. In the barracks, by 9 every other night, lights out and you're in bed. This night, they could stay out. So I set out. There's a lot of guys paraded around and sang carols. And some guys that were so used to the regimen of being in at night, they didn't come out. But I set out most of the night.
Why was your first camp evacuated?
Because the Russians got close. The Russians were coming in from the east. They got within, I don't know how far, but you could hear artillery far off, and the Germans moved us out. Let me tell you a story. At one of our reunions, we used to have reunions of people who were incarcerated at Stalag Roof 3. One of our reunions, we brought over and paid for them, I think it was 3 or 4 women who were young ladies at that time and worked as censors. They were the camp male censors. And we brought them over. They gave us a talk at our one reunion. And they told us that what happened was after we left, some of the guys that had not made it on the march, and some of the guys who had not been able to start out on the march because of sickness, they were kept there until the Russians came in. But the women were evacuated before the Russians came through. And but anyhow, this one lady brought back a letter that had come into the camp after we evacuated for one of the guys, and that guy was at the reunion, and she gave that guy that letter. Now that's 50-some years ago. He got a letter from his mother. I wasn't a dry eye in the place. Yeah.
Where were you taken to next?
I was taken from Sagan, Germany, now Sagan, Poland, to north of Munich, a place called Moosburg, to Stalag, just plain Stalag prison, 7A. And that was just packed with people, all kind of races, nationalities, Indians, British, South American country had a contingent of people fighting in Italy. Now, what's the big? Brazil. There were Brazilians, I never knew this, but there were Brazilians serving in the Allied forces, and they were fighting in Italy. There were some Brazilian prisoners, yeah, you name it, and it was there. And that's where I was when we were liberated on April 29th.
What were the conditions like on your march?
The conditions on the march were terrible. We started out about 9 o'clock at night, blizzard conditions. I always told the kids that I had to wade snow up to here, but then a guy wrote a book, and he said it was only that deep, so. But it was cold, and it was not, it was, when we walked out the gate, there were Germans standing on each side. Now you can picture a single file line, or a line maybe 3 or 4 abreast, you know, it would go for miles. Well, as we went out through the gate, a German handed each guy a block of German margarine, like a pound of butter, and a loaf of bread. Now that's all we had, except what we could carry. Now we had an idea that this was going to happen, and a lot of the guys made backpacks of some kind. Most of the backpacks was their other pair of trousers that they tied to feet, then tied it over, fastened the belt, and that became a backpack. You know, and they carried some candy. There was always a candy bar in the Red Cross troop. It was a terrible bar. It was about that long, about that square. It's called a D-bar. And it must have been made in Lincoln's administration. It was hard, but it would never get stale. But it was also awful hard to bite. So we had those. We had D-bars. You know? And I used the butter to smear in my face and hands to help maybe keep from getting windburned or chapped. But that was tough. It was really tough. We walked all night. We got a break. Oh, I don't know how long. I was able to get into a factory that made some kind of ceramics, and it was hot in there, so I was able to dry my socks and things of that kind. Some of the guys ended up in a little church. It was a Lutheran church, just a little church along the way, and they crowded in there. And after the war, some of those guys went back and contributed money and put stained glass windows in the church, which is now a Catholic church, showing prisoners on the march. Yeah. Now, I didn't see that. That was another group. Because you see, the whole camp was out. And we all didn't go right to Moosburg. Some of us I went to Moosburg, but some of the guys went to Nuremberg, which is north of Munich. And they were in a camp there, and then eventually they also came down to Moosburg. But the march was bad. It was, then when they finally did get to this place called Spremberg and put us on the train, we were on that train for 3 days in boxcars, just locked in boxcars. Couldn't sit down. You had to, if you were going to sit down or lie down, you had to take turns. You had to do it in shifts, because if you tried to, you'd just too crowded, and you couldn't see. There were slits on each side end of the boxcar, one on this side of the end and one on this. This is not a nice story, but we got to outside of Dresden, I think it was, stopped at the station, and there's a bridge. This is in the evening, a bridge over the tracks, and German civilians, and a lot of guys had dysentery, and they let you out, you know. So for long you would see just guys squatting in the snow, and that's not a pretty picture. But that was a bad time. Yeah, we were like not nice to be locked in the boxcar. Plus, if the boxcars were parked in sidings, they were apt to get bombed or strafed. Now, it didn't happen to us, but some of our fighter planes did strafe boxcars containing POWs, because the Germans didn't put any Red Cross markings on the top of the boxcar. Didn't happen to me, but it did happen.
Did any prisoners try to escape during the march?
Oh yeah, yeah, they did, and it was simple. But you know, again, where are you going to go? You're in the middle of Germany, and it's cold, and you don't have anything, and you know very well that the end isn't imminent, but it's coming close. So, yeah, I think some guys dropped out. Supposedly, see, we had a strange situation. One day, we called them purges. When a new bunch of prisoners would be brought into the camp, all the prisoners there would stand by the gate, And as these guys come in, somebody, will you, anybody from Pennsylvania, anybody from here, anybody from there? Well, one day an American general came in. He was POW. And then the rumors started. Well, this guy deliberately got captured because our intelligence indicated that there would be some problems with the POWs and they want to have somebody to represent us. And that guy and several other high-ranking officers who were prisoners were taken off the march and went into, I don't know for sure where, to negotiate with the German people. See, Hitler ordered the prisoners all killed, but the general staff didn't do that. They were trying to hold on to the prisoners to get a better bargain when the peace terms came up. If they still had the prisoners, maybe we wouldn't insist on unconditional surrender. So.
What did you think of the German officers that were in charge of the camp?
Well, they were very professional. Now, the Stalag Luft, because it was Air Force, was run by the German Air Force. In other words, the Germans had an independent Air Force before we did. We didn't get an Air Force until 1947. We were an Army Air Force before that, but not so in Germany. The German broke their military down into Luftwaffe, Wehrmacht, which is the German Army, and Kriegsmarine, which is the German Navy. So the Wehrmacht ran prisoner camps for captured infantry. The Navy captured Navy personnel, although they didn't have many, and I think most of those Navy people were put into Air Force prisons. But our camps were run by the Luftwaffe. And the guy in charge, when I first got there, was a guy named Lindauer, colonel, German colonel, very professional, did his job. Now they kicked him out after the Great Escape because they had to have somebody to fault. And they sent him to the Russian front, and he was badly wounded. But to give you an idea, we had a guy in our camp, a Colonel Clark, Bob Clark, who was the commanding officer of our camp for a while, and also was the Big X. He interceded for Lindauer when he was picked up and was going to be tried for war crimes. He went to his assistants and he got him off. Then we had a Simolet, I think the guy's name was. Actually, I didn't know them. I mean, I'd see them every day when they counted. They'd go down the row. You stood in ranks, and a German walked down the front, and a German walked down the back, count the row, and then multiply by the number of guys. And then they checked if anybody was sick back in the barracks, and then they knew whether they had anybody there. Now, one time, this probably isn't an answer to that question, but I'm thinking about it now. There was an escape attempt, and somebody did get out, so we were ordered not to go out for the count, delay the count, so they'd give this guy more chance that they don't know he's out. So we didn't go out. Well, pretty soon in come a squad of Germans with some machine guns and dogs, and we went out, and then they discovered that the guy missed. So, but no, the officers I didn't really get. There was one Unteroffizier, that would be like a sergeant, Luftwaffe, and he was berserk. He was nuts. The night that we were marching out, he was running around with his pistol out, waving it around and screaming. He was just in a panic. He was, I don't know, it's a good thing he probably wasn't around when we did get out, because he probably would have taken a beating. He just one of those typical guys that power went to his head, and he just didn't have a cool head about him at all.
What kept you going in the camp?
Well, I don't know. I didn't want to stay there, so I better stay alive if I'm going to get home. I wanted to get home. Mm-hmm. What kept me going was good companionship. Those guys were pretty good guys. Now, there were a few that went around the bend. The British call it going around the bend. Get stir crazy. But most of the guys we maintained a sense of humor. Get a bunch of Americans together, it's pretty hard to get them down. Plus the fact, I was convinced I was going to get home. Even when we were going down, I knew I was going to survive. I just counted on it. I don't know why. I never, even when I was in solitary, I just never felt, and it's not I'm special or anything like that, but I just never thought that I wasn't going to get home. I used to sing cowboy songs in the cell.
Why were you moved to a third camp?
Well, we weren't, oh, okay, you're Captain Budapest, Stalag Luft 3. We were moved to Stalag 7A because of the Russians taking Stalag Luft 3.
Mm.
Yeah, if we'd have stayed at Stalag Luft 3, the Russians would have liberated us. And the Germans didn't want to do that because here's 2,000 prisoners that may help us later on.
Mm-hmm.
So we were moved in order to keep us from falling into the hands of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And there were prison camps in Western Europe that were moved because they were in danger of being overrun by Americans or English.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Should I ask that one? What was some of the slang that you used in the POW camps?
Oh, well, we called the Germans goons. If you don't remember Popeye the Sailor comic strip,
Mm-hmm.
remember the goon? With the big funny hairy arms? Well, that's what we called the Germans, goons. The towers that they around the camp, they were called goon towers. We used to say, well, the Germans' favorite word was raus, 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 get out of here, move, move. So if you had somebody that was slow moving in your room or something, you always yell at them, raus. We were called Kriegies. Kriegie is short for Kriegsgefangenen, which is prisoner of war in German. And this isn't nice, but we all often got called, or we often said to ourselves, if we were just feeling bad or something didn't go right, say, Krieg, Scheiße under Kriegsgefangenen, which isn't a nice thing, and I'm not going to translate it, but I think you get the idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's appel. So that was a French term for roll call. And we called it appel. We didn't call it roll call. That's when they marched you out. Brew was a British term for tea. So we since the British were there first, we used the term brew if you're going to make coffee or something like this. We just had German coffee, which I don't know what it was. It wasn't coffee. It had a very strong licorice taste. There were some other ones. I have a list someplace of those terms. Maybe I can show you.
Okay. How were you liberated?
We were liberated by a spearhead of the Patton's Army, the 14th Armored Division. I'll never forget. It was I told you, it was Sunday, and they came in tanks, and it was a madhouse, absolutely a madhouse. The prisoners were climbing over the fence. A tank came by with so many guys on it, you couldn't even see the tank. You know, the tank, the GIs coming in were tossing cigarettes. I stayed back. I just wanted to take in all that was happening. And while I'm standing back here by myself, a Jeep come in, pulling a little trailer, and a driver and a big captain, I'll never forget him, great big guy with a big great coat on, and a machine gun across his chest, and he stopped and he yelled at me, do you know, forget his first name, McCracken? And I said, no, I don't. He was a captain, this guy. He said, well, he's my brother, and I'm coming to get him out of this damn place. And he reached around into the trailer, and he tossed me an orange, and he disappeared. Now, years go by, and we're living here, and one night I get a phone call, and the guy identifies himself as Harry McCracken. And he said, my brother was in Stalag Luft 3, and I came in to help liberate him. I said, oh my God, you were the captain. He said, no, I was a sergeant. I said, no, you weren't. You threw me an orange. No, I said, I didn't throw you an orange. So anyhow, make a long story short, there were two guys in the camp named McCracken, not related. One was from Pennsylvania, one was from Virginia. They each had brothers in the spearhead that came through, the captain and this guy, the sergeant. I saw the captain, I didn't see the sergeant. At our next POW reunion in Chicago, they had a special table with the four McCrackens. They didn't know each other, weren't related. One was a fighter pilot. The other guy was a sergeant. Now we had some enlisted men in Stalag Luft 3 because some of the guys, figuring that they would get better treatment in an officers' camp, signed on to do cook duty and things of that kind. Mm-hmm. So, and McCracken was one of them. Yeah.
How did you feel when you were liberated?
Oh, I felt great. We broke into a building and stole our, every month, I think it was every month, when the Germans counted us, they made us go by, they called it a picture rappel. They had, everybody had a card, and on it was a little snapshot and information in German about what you looked like, how much you weighed, things of that kind. And you had to go by a desk and there'd be a German out in the field. And he'd look at that and he'd say, "Ja, das ist you." And, you know, I could have told him, "Yeah, it's me." I didn't have to ask. But, so I got that card. I have it here still. I might even have one in here, or a copy of it. Yeah, there's what it looked like. That's after I'd been in solitary confinement. Now, it was on a piece of cardboard and it was in red color. Everybody had one. Had your prisoner of war number on there. See, I was trying to smile. I didn't want those fritzes to put in New Buffalo. I didn't manage too good, though, did I?
What steps did the POWs have to go through before you could go home?
Well, they made us stay at Stalag 7A because they couldn't take care of us. This is the spearhead of an army. There's 100,000 people that need food and things like that. So we had to wait until some organization came along. So it was 2 weeks before anything happened. But in the meantime, a lot of guys just took off. They just headed west, bombed rides, got into Paris, got to London, and got home before a lot of us did. But we were told to stay, so I stayed. And finally, trucks came in and took us to a big field with a landing strip alongside it. I think it was a place called Ingolstadt, which was on the Danube. And we just sit there, thousands of guys in little groups, and planes would fly in, C-46 and 7s. You've seen the planes with parachute jumpers jump out of that kind of plane. Mm-hmm. And when the plane would come in, they'd take on a bunch, fly it to Le Havre in France, which is a port. And at that port, outside that port, was a camp called Camp Lucky Strike. And that was a place where they cleaned you up, deloused you, because all of us were lousy. I mean, lousy, bug lousy, and dirty, and gave us some money, very little, and some clothes. And we just stayed there until a ship would come in, a troop ship, take us back. And what they did was, if a ship came in, maybe the 1st Army Division was going to be sent home. So they'd load that division on a ship. Any spaces left over, they'd say, "Okay, you got room for 6 of you, or 10 of you, or 100 of you." So then I finally got on a ship and came home. That was, I don't know, July. And we landed at, we went by the Statue of Liberty. I think we landed at Newark or New Jersey someplace. Got off the ship. Now we had to walk through, it was Newark, through the town to the train station, get on a train and take us to Camp Kilmer. Well, the guy in front of me, his home was Newark. So we're walking single file to go to the train. We come to a street corner, he just turns left. I'm home. The rest of us got on the train, I called home right away and said, "We're going to get a 30-day leave, and I don't know when." So my dad and a friend of his met every train that came in from the east, every day, till I got home one morning. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I got off the train in Altoona. Yeah.
Did you make any close relationships while in the POW camp?
Yeah, many of them, yeah. Still have, yep. Guys that I served with, it's a funny thing, but I probably have gotten to know more people after the war than I knew during the war. Because you get to your air base and you fly every day, so you don't make any friends. You don't have anything to, now if the weather gets bad, you associate a little bit. But most of the time, if the weather's bad, you sleep because you're tired. You scrounge food. Even in Italy, the mess tent with all the food, it was not too far from our place, and if you went there in the dark and snuck up underneath the fender, you could get cans of pineapple.
And you still attend the reunions?
Yep. Well, no, wait a minute. The prisoner Stalag Luft 3 Association stopped having reunions, I don't know, 10 years ago. Too few. Now, in the meantime, somebody who was active in that has started them up again, but I've never gone back. After they said this is our last one, that was enough. Bomb group, we still have reunions. But we're only going to have one more, and it's going to be in September at Savannah, because some of the guys trained in Savannah, and that's it. So, and it's right. That's the normal way things are. I mean, things end. You just have to accept. A lot of guys don't want to do that. They fuss around and they want to continue having reunions. Well, I don't want to be the last guy to crawl into a reunion on crutches or in a wheelchair or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's good. It's the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
How did your service and experience in the Air Force affect your life?
Well, I think it made me more appreciative of simple things. I think it toughened me up, maybe too much, if you ask Doug, whose backside I kicked a couple times. But no, I don't know. That was a part of my life. I'm not going to say it was a big part of my life. And you remember, I was 17 when I enlisted. I was 19 when I started flying. I was 19 when I got shot. I spent my 20th birthday in a prison camp. So I did a lot of growing up. I never had a teenage. I mean, you know, I went from 17 to 40 pretty quick. Now, and it was a big part of my life, don't misunderstand me, but it wasn't the most important part of my life. This was the most important part, the family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What did you do after you returned home?
After I come home? Well, they gave us 30 days, what they called delay en route. You could go home for 30 days. That was the first time I was home probably since 40. Well, it was the first time I was home since October 43. So it was almost 2 years. So I was home. Now, nobody was home. The war, you know, was over in Europe, but it wasn't over in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, it's hard for you to believe what a little town of Portage. I'll bet you during the war years in Portage, you could walk downtown and see very, very few young guys. They were all gone. Same way with Altoona. Everybody was gone. The only teachers teaching were women teachers. And some of them had, you know, some of them had joined the WACs or the Marines or whatever. So after the 30 days was up, they sent me and a lot of other Air Force guys to Miami, Florida. And they put us in a hotel on the beach. And there we were to be, we got so-called rest and relaxation. It was terrible. You didn't do anything. You know, you just went out, walked the beach, and there wasn't any military discipline, nothing. But that was in the process of retraining us, and we were going to be sent to the Pacific. We were going back into combat. And then they dropped the bomb, and the war ended. And had it not been for that, I'd have been back in combat. We all would have been, because I was healthy. There's nothing wrong with me. That's true of all the guys. So then the war, that ended, so they sent us home. Now that's where I have trouble knowing just how long my service is. Because at that point, they said you're separated.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say you're discharged. They didn't say you're in the reserves. They just said you're separated. So I come home, went to Penn State, used the GI Bill. Hadn't been for the GI Bill, couldn't afford to go to car. We never had a car as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It was Depression time. And see, that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of guys my age and a little older, you know, going into the Army was good. They got better food, they got better clothes than they did during the Depression years. So it wasn't a big switch. But so I come home, went to Penn State, started to teach. And I've been here ever since. They carried me out of here.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we have not covered in the interview?
Oh, yeah. Let me think once. Occasionally somebody like kids like you will say thanks, and that's nice. But you should understand too that I benefited from my service. You know, if my service gave a continuation of a democratic way of life, and it did, and people like you and older have come along since have benefited from that. So did I, because I helped perpetuate a kind of lifestyle that I wanted to live in a free country, in a democracy. So whereas sure it's nice to say thanks, but you got to remember, I also profited by my service. Mm-hmm. And the government's been good to me. Since 1980, there have been certain entitlements given to ex-POWs. I get my teeth worked on, my glasses, my hearing aid. I go to the VA for checkups every 6 months and things of that kind. Now, there's one other thing I'd like to say, and that is, you talk about heroes, and every time you talk about it, embarrasses me. I don't know what that is. I've known a lot of guys that were more heroic than I ever was, and I was fortunate. I got home. You know, 5 guys from my crew that I trained with and knew very well didn't get home, so I was very fortunate. But heroes. I often think, and I've asked my younger brother, who I had a brother in the Pacific too, next to me. So there were my parents who had to go through those war years. Mom doing the housework, Dad going to work every day with the thought in mind, what's going on with my 2 sons. And that blows my mind. They're heroes. Now, not my parents, just my parents, but any parent that went through something like that. I've had a great life. I wouldn't have the strength to do it again, though.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Now,